Okay, good morning, everyone. Could I get a thumbs up if you can hear me loud and clear? Can anyone hear me? I'd like to see a thumbs up if you can hear me. Excellent. Well, good morning and a very warm welcome to this first in a series of talks which are aimed at opening up young people's minds to what does it take to move from campus to career? What is the progression in moving from campus to career? So today in this first presentation, I'll be talking to you about three behaviors that set you apart. My name is Paul, and I am a man of many trades, so I try out many things. And my hope is that in this conversation, I can share from my experience and I can get to learn also what your interests and needs are. And I'd like to align what I have experienced and what I have learned with what I feel is needed in not just Kenya, but in the African market. So my goal is to share and to also learn from you, and so my hope is that we can, in coming together and having these sessions, that we can learn a lot more than just doing this on our own. So in this session, I want to give you three ideas that I hope can make a difference in how you approach your career, as you build your career, and as you set yourself up for success. So in this presentation, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through a number of things. The first is I'm going to give you just a little bit of an introduction to my rationale, like why bother with this? This is taking part of my time. Like, what do I hope to gain out of this? I'm going to give you a bit of my story, like what inspires me. Like it shouldn't say what inspired me, but what really inspires me. Why am I driven to want to do this? And then we're going to dive straight into the three behaviors. And I've kept them a secret at the moment, but I'm going to reveal them one at a time. And hopefully they will resonate with you and you will find that they can add value as you develop your career. There's going to be a bonus behavior, which I think is really important. It's sort of touched on in behavior number three, but I want to sort of draw it out and make sure that um, you can make you can distinguish this particular behavior and use it as a benchmark to develop. My hope is that by the end we can have a Q&A session and I can also learn a little bit about you. So I'm sharing about myself and sharing my ideas, but I'd love to also get questions from you. If you disagree with me, if you think that there's something I've said that doesn't make sense and you'd like to get some clarity, I'd be very happy to hear your feedback. So that's going to be also very helpful as I try and run more of these types of talks. So I'd love to hear what you'd find valuable. So that's a bit of a rundown of our program for today. So why don't we get started? So, a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Paul, and at the moment, I lead a data science team. So I've worked in data science for quite a number of years. I've also worked in software development for quite a number of years. It's something I'm very interested in, passionate about, but I'm also aware that it is very possible for one to pay a lot of attention to only one side of their skill set and ignore another. And you really want to be well-rounded. Like if you think about when you're roasting a cob of maize, you want to get that cob of maize roasted evenly throughout. When you're roasting chicken or when you're baking bread, you really want to make sure that it is well prepared all around. And that's really the objective of developing a career. And that's what I really want to try and do with myself. I want to learn as much as possible. I know that I have areas where I have weaknesses, and I'd love to learn what those are. And I do that by interacting with people. I do that by giving talks like this and getting feedback. And all of this is in order that I can grow and become an all-rounded individual. So that's a bit about me. but I'd like to get to know a little bit about you. So what I want to find out is who is in the room. So if you could go to this, I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat. And what I want is if you can fill in this form, you can use a QR code, or let me see if I can copy the URL. So that's what it's going to look like, but I can copy for you the URL. Let's put that in the chat and let's get some conversation going. I'd love to hear a bit about you and just to get a sense of the spectrum of experiences and interests and backgrounds and aspirations. So this is going to be live. I just see as you fill in this form, it's going to update. So please take a moment, fill in the form, and let's just see. So this is completely anonymous. I'm not collecting any personal information about you. I don't want your emails or, in fact, one of the questions about age is got very wide age ranges. But I just want to capture like who is in the room and what are your backgrounds. I'll also ask you to mute yourself so that we don't have any chatter because this is being recorded. So let's see. Has anyone successfully completed these forms? This form? Why don't I get a thumbs up? If you complete the form, please give me a thumbs up and then I can move on. Is it working for everyone? Okay, so let's see. Okay, so one person has filled in so far. So far we have one male um, is going to complete or has completed his undergraduate degree this year, electrical engineering, University of Nairobi. Research, great. That's exciting. I love it when someone is very clear early on in their career. Okay, let's get a few more responses. Okay, so now we have another gentleman. Second person for 2025. So it looks like, okay, electrical engineering, Triple E, very good. Also University of Nairobi. Technology, oh, that's lovely. That's exciting. And these are fresh graduates. That's exciting. Really, really exciting. As you can tell from the smile on my face. Okay, anyone else? I just give maybe 2 more minutes just to get a sense. As I said, this survey is completely anonymous. So you can even use a private browser tab. And I'm not trying to collect any personal information here. I just want to get a sense because I really want to try and address some really important ideas, which would probably be very useful for people who are just about to hit the job market. So anyone else? I only have two people and I currently have 13 participants. Okay, I see that we don't have any takers. So it means then I can assume that everyone is an electrical engineer who's just about to graduate. Okay, so we have a third response and another electrical engineer from Strathmore, graduate next year. Great. And you'd love to be an executive. That is amazing. I really like that. I really like that you can see very far and you can see the trajectory. And I hope that as we go through this session, that I can sort of point you in the right direction on how to grow your career. Okay, anyone else? So this is the last call. Last call. Okay, I just give it another 30 seconds. Okay, I see people are shy to fill in this form. That's perfectly fine. Okay, I think we'll work with what we have. So we have a lot of engineers. I will assume that it's not only engineers in the room, and that's perfectly fine. Um, But thank you for those who filled that in, and let's move on. So here's the first question that we should try to address. Why? Why am I bothered to set up this series of talks? What's in it for me? Like, why would I take the time to do this? Well, the first thing is, if I had something like this when I was just graduating or about to graduate or freshly graduated, I think they would have come in handy because when you enter the job market, you really enter with a lot of imagination and you are relying on folklore, stories that your classmates have told you about how, you know, people who have succeeded and gone on ahead and what they did to succeed, but you don't have the full story. And my goal is to be present and talk about these things so that you can learn about them. So I really want to fast track those who want to really go far, like the guys who want to be in technology or research or become an executive. What do you need to do? And there's a lot of things you need to do. So this talk will only cover three things. But my goal is to make this a routine of sharing because there's so much you can learn by sharing. Now, I know that for a lot of you, you're in an age, in a time where you have been under a lot of instruction and you really want to break free from that. But I really want to invite you to consider that this is the time when you are really vulnerable. This is a time when you are very likely to make massive mistakes. And therefore, taking advice can be such a game changer in your career. There are little things that you can do that you've taken for granted. There are habits and behaviors that maybe you had when you were in high school and you have put them to sleep because of how tough your degree was. But now is the time for you to awaken those muscles because you're about to engage with people who have got nothing. They have no obligation for you. They want to hire you and they want to employ you and put you into some production activity. They don't owe you anything. Your lecturers have always they've owed you. You know, your teachers in high school, they owed you. Your parents owed you. But now you're stepping into the job market where nobody owes you anything. And the question they want to ask is, what are you bringing on board? So here's the first thing I want you to think about. I'd like you to think of yourself as a seed, like this little picture on the bottom left. You are a seed, and your goal as a seed, you know you only have one shot at trying to grow. Because if you grow in an environment where you're not able to take root, then you will die. And I mean that metaphorically, but it could also apply in practical terms. If you are unable to get a good foothold, to place yourself in the right place, then it's very difficult for you to grow. So that's the first thing. Think of yourself as a seed, and that this seed is hoping to be the tallest tree in the forest. That's going to take many years. So that's one idea. The second idea I want you to think about is I'd like you to put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter. Again, as I said, nobody owes you anything. If you put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter, why should they make a decision in your favor? Like, let that sink in. Like, why? Why should they fight for your CV? Why should they fight for you to get the job? What is it that they see in you for the position that's being advertised? And when you're early on in your career, you don't have experience to show, but you've probably had engagements on campus being part of various clubs and activities. And if you're very early on in your undergraduate life, like this is a great time for you to be plugging into something extracurricular that stretches your social muscles because the world is primarily social. You may have a skill that you want to develop, but you have a social dimension that people lean to. So that as you bring your skills to the job, they want to see that those skills are wrapped in certain social graces and social awareness. And that's why it's very good for you to do this early on. So that's the second idea that I want you to think about. The third idea that I want you to think about is this image on the bottom right. And this has to do with growing skills. Now, one of the things I've come to learn over the years is that growing skills is like building a pearl. How long does it take to build a pearl? It takes years. It takes years to build a pearl. And what does it involve? It involves coating a tiny pebble successively over and over again until it grows to the size of something that is valuable and attractive and beautiful. But it is one layer at a time. And that is a mixture of various skills. It's skills like being able to, basic things like typing. A lot of people take that for granted. They think that because they know how to use a computer, typing is not important. Typing is so important. Being able to write clearly, that is such an important skill. Those are foundational skills that a lot of people take for granted and ignore. But these are really important. So these are the key ideas that drive me to start this. Like, I want to see, I'd love to see in 20 years, someone who listened to some of the things they picked up from this series of talks, they put them into practice and they tell me, hey, I'm now leading an international organization, or hey, I'm running a very successful business because of just one idea that I put into practice. So it starts early on, it starts off really small. It's easy to ignore, but it is those daily practices, those tiny ideas that can take you to the next level. So that's the reason behind this. I really believe that as young people, if you can take advantage of these ideas, you can go very far. The other thing I'd like you to be aware of is what are the advantages of being a fresh graduate? Now, being a fresh graduate, I know that it may seem counterintuitive, but in reality, there are three advantages for being fresh and completely unskilled, knowledgeable, hungry, but unskilled. And these are the three reasons. Reason number one is that you don't have a bias in how you work. When you work for many years, you develop habits, some of which are positive, some of which are negative. And the longer you work, the more ingrained they are. And therefore, what, what is what is really important is that early on, while you're still flexible, that's a greatest time for you to be hired. And there are some organizations that understand this and they look for young, fresh blood to bring them into the workplace and influence them in line with the culture of that organization. So this is idea number one, that the advantage of being a fresh graduate is that you don't have this bias. You can be pointed in any direction and you're just going to go. The second advantage of being a fresh graduate is your learning capacity is actually very high. I don't know why it's not showing up. Oh, there we go. Your learning capacity is at its peak. You've just come out of grueling exams. You have that feel, you know what it takes to prepare for an exam. And therefore, if someone were to sit you for another exam, you're very likely to do very well because you still have the reflexes, how to read and how to study, and waking up early or sleeping late and reading for extended periods of time. Your muscle is still quite fresh. And of course, you're still young, but that your learning capacity is at its peak. And that's a big advantage because the more years you spend away from learning, the more years you spend away from your last degree, the harder it is to learn. And it's so easy to take this for granted, to assume that, oh, just because you understood things when you were an undergraduate, 15 years later on, you can say, okay, then let me take a master's. It wouldn't be the same. It will not be the same, especially if you're picking a topic which you feel is exciting and hot, but has a lot of ground to cover. You'll really struggle, and you'll have taken for granted that in reality, what happens is your memory literally fades, and you lose your understanding. You may retain a visceral feeling that you still understand certain topics or certain ideas or certain techniques, but the truth of the matter is those things fade with time. Unless if you don't put them into practice, they fade with time. The third, and probably the best, is you're cheap. And that means you can be hired by the dozen. That means that you people are willing to experiment with you. And it's also good for you because it gives you opportunities to try out different things. Don't be in a rush. Don't be in a rush to say, I need to buy a car within the next 1 or 2 years. There's no need to rush. What you need to do is build a solid foundation. And if it means accepting being cheap for a season, but for you to gain experience and knowledge and deep insights, it's worth it because in the long run, you will reap great rewards if you have built a strong foundation. Now, this another idea which really drives what I do, and I think a lot of you will probably resonate with you, is the future is Africa. It may not seem like that right now, but the future is Africa. Why? Demographically, Africa has got the highest growth rate. Africa has got the highest potential for economic growth. Africa is hungry. We don't have as many opportunities. But that means that people are willing and hungry to hustle. Africa is not poor. We are not poor. We are just not yet developed. We're just not yet built. And that's where the opportunities are. There are huge opportunities for people who see the potential of Africa. The developed countries are at the peak of their development. The rate of economic growth for those countries is usually very small, that they are happy with very small um, growth rates. But Africa is just the analogy I love to use is like Africa is is a woman who's been pregnant for years and she's just waiting to give birth. And there's a day when everything will change and you need to be on the right side of history. So this is a really key idea. Africa is not poor, it's just underbuilt. And our greatest wealth is our youth. Like we have a huge percentage of the population are young people. They're strong, they're ready to learn, just that they haven't been plugged in. And once opportunities to plug in these young people arise, then Africa will take off. So hold on to your hopes. Don't give up. Africa is the future of mankind. Okay, great. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about my story and what inspires me. I've told you about what drives me, why I'm running this set of talks, but what is it that inspires me? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. So, as some of you may know, I graduated from the University of Nairobi, electrical engineering, and I got my first job actually before I graduated. I was very fortunate and I worked for a big telecom company, and I was there for a year and a half, and then I moved to another telecom company, stayed there for a year and a half, and then I got very restless. I felt restless because I didn't feel that I was growing. I felt stuck. In fact, if anything, I would say that I had a bit of a depression and I was hungry. I was just so hungry. And a lot of what drove this hunger was a trip that I took in 2006 to Italy. So I attended a workshop at an institute called ICTP, the International Center for Theoretical Physics. And it was my first time to visit a developed country where the infrastructure was really world class. But on top of that, this institute that I visited, ICTP, was just state of the art. They had resources everywhere. I remember using a computer to browse the internet, and the pages were loading in seconds. Like at that time, if you would browse the internet in Kenya, whenever you'd enter a URL, there'd be a little progress bar at the bottom, and you could see it gradually opening the page. And it was just a shock for me to see that internet could be so fast. But then aside from that, I was just shocked at the infrastructure. I was just surprised. I was like, when did this happen? And I came back and continued my undergraduate education, and now my eyes were open. I was like, oh my goodness, there's just so much out there. There's so much possibilities. I'd love to continue doing that. But then now when I got my job, that sort of derailed me. I thought, oh, I'd like to taste some money. And so that's when I worked for a while. And then when I was now in my second job, I got a chance to travel to Egypt. So I tried to travel to Egypt and then France. And I remember when I was on the way from the airport to the hotel in Egypt, and we were driving on an overpass, and we went on an overpass which went over an overpass. And I was like, what? We don't have this in Kenya. Like, this is unbelievable. And then I went to France and we took the high-speed train from Paris to a town at the north called Lannion. And it was a distance of about 1,000 kilometers, which we covered in 3 hours. I was completely blown. And every station we'd stop at, the towns were all built up. Like the infrastructure was complete. There was nothing you could point out and say, like, this is broken or this is not functioning. It was like, when did this happen? I was just so shocked. And then I went to South Africa. And again, South Africa is very impressive, very good infrastructure. But the reason I went to South Africa was now that angst and discomfort in me when I was working. I just felt like there's so much more. I don't want to settle. I don't want to stop now. I want to keep learning. I was very fortunate to study at a school called the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And that was such an experience. We had faculty from all over the world who they were just so passionate and they would come in and we were all living in a hotel which had been turned into a school. And that experience of having the labs were open 24 hours, the lecturers were available all the time. You could have conversations at midnight. And it was just such an environment that helped me grow and learn a lot of skills. And that was really a pivotal moment for me. And it also opened up an opportunity then to now go and study in Ireland. And again, being in a developed country and just seeing all the infrastructure, the libraries, things which are public, available to every citizen. And I thought, I wish we can have this in Africa. I wish that we can have the kind of resources that people take for granted in our countries. Because those are the things, the infrastructure, the technology that we need to rely on just to learn. And it made me realize, even in interacting with a lot of young people, that Africa's greatest constraint is not a lack of resources, but in a lot of cases is that skills are just put into the wrong place. They're just misaligned. And that I think is a great tragedy for a lot of young people, is that they end up working in careers just because they need to make money or they feel like they want to quickly progress financially, and they end up trapped. They end up trapped so that increasingly the only opportunities for them to develop their careers push them farther and farther away from what they would be passionate about. So they settle very quickly. And that's a big tragedy. And this is the reason why I was saying that you'd rather be cheap but well aligned labor. You'd rather, go back to school or extend your learning, look for opportunities to develop yourself further. Because what we have in Kenya, the education we have in Kenya, is not the greatest education. I mean, up to high school, we have really good education, but our university education is really, really lacking. And that's a reason why I would really strongly encourage anyone, please, if you can, try and get an opportunity to study abroad. Try and expose yourself to what the standards of education really are. Okay, so that's it about what inspires me. I think now is a great time to talk about the first behavior. And the first behavior that I really want to um, encourage you to develop is proactive ownership. Proactive ownership. So if you're taking notes, just write this down. Proactive ownership. That's behavior number one. What do we mean when we talk about proactive ownership? Well, the best way to encapsulate this is in a quote. Think about someone who is proactive and who takes ownership of what they do. This is what people will say about them. They don't wait to be told, they take initiative. Like they see a problem and they don't circle the problem and hope that someone else is going to come along and solve it. No, they fix it. They don't wait to be told. And if you were hired in a position where you're not being paid very well, but this was an attribute that you had, imagine what they will say. Like if they want to downsize, you'll be the last one to be gotten rid of. Why? Because they'll say, oh, they don't wait to be told. Whenever they see a problem, they fix it. That frees up my mind as the manager. That frees up my mind to then think about other things. They will see the value of having you on their team. And that's very rare. I can tell you that is something that is so rare. A lot of people don't take initiative. And that's why we can live in an environment which is littered. We can live in an environment where people drive recklessly on the road. It's because they don't take any initiative. They don't on their own accord try to do the right thing. And this will make you stand out. So let's try and think about this. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to have proactive ownership? Well, as I said before, up to this point in your life, you have lived a passive life. Everything has been planned out for you. Think about the whole curriculum from primary school, high school, university. You had no part in it. Like the most you did was you chose a topic for your dissertation, end of your undergraduate dissertation. But even that topic was part of a pool. Maybe if you were proactive enough, you may have proposed one, but that's just a tiny part of your whole experience. Your whole experience so far has been passive. You're told you need to be here by this time, you need to do this by this time, you need to read this, you're going to be examined on this day. But this is where is a big, big difference. In the workplace, nobody, nobody is going to chase you around and give you a timetable. Like they're going to hire you, they'll give you with a job description, and in the early days, they'll maybe say, okay, we're going to train you, we're going to try and get you started, but they will expect that you will notice problems. They will expect that you're going to propose solutions. They will expect that you're going to follow through. It won't be up to them to babysit you and make sure you meet the deadlines. No, it will be your responsibility. And taking initiative, having proactive ownership is what's going to make you stand out. So this is number one. Now, let's see, what does it look like? What are the attributes? Like if you were to exemplify proactive ownership, what does it look like? Well, here are some examples. Someone who asks, what can I do next? And not in a way to ignore what they have refused to do, but because they've finished already and they are looking for the next task. What can I do next? I'm ready. I'm available. Show me, show me. Just point me in the right direction. I'm just going to go. That makes a big difference. Flagging issues early on instead of saying, oh, well, I think it's going to disappear. You know, if you're working in a technical environment and you log onto a system and you see an error, and the error is in the corner of your eye, but it's been there before. It's been there for the last 3 months, and you've ignored it. That's not being proactive. Being proactive means the first time you see it, it bothers you. It disturbs you and you want to have it fixed and you raise it, you escalate it, you pursue it, you try and make sure that it is resolved. And some people will be irritated and be like, what's wrong with this person? What's wrong with this guy? What's wrong with this lady? Why are they so bothered by this? Nobody else cares. Management hasn't asked us why we should fix this. Nobody's following up on this. But it's those little things that will make you stand out. Flagging something early on, right the first time when you see it. It also means taking responsibility when something goes wrong, not keeping quiet and fearing. And it may be the case that you may face repercussions for this, but you'd rather be known as someone who takes responsibility, which will teach you how to then be accountable and careful than sweeping things under the rug and ignoring them and hoping that they disappear. And finally, another great example is someone who offers ideas or improvements without being asked. And again, you may come across as the word we use is kimbelembele, like he's always trying to change things in the system. But I can assure you, if you're in an environment where that attitude of offering an ideas and improvements is scoffed at and looked down upon, then you'll be in the wrong environment. But you're going to eventually find an environment where people value that and they will reward you for that. And there are places, I can assure you, there are work environments where everyone plays at another level and where offering ideas and improvements is not something for which you receive a badge of honor, but it's just normal. It's just normal that people come up with good ideas and think of ways to improve. Like, think about the best companies in the world. What makes them so great? It's because in that work environment, it's just normal. It's part of the culture that people offer ideas. People are always trying to improve. When I think about this, I'm thinking about a company like Toyota. And Toyota they have a world famous production system, their way of manufacturing called the Toyota production system. And what's unique about Toyota and a few other companies is they've structured their company in such a way that every employee, every member of staff is expected to contribute ideas. And that's the reason why, as a company, they have got such a wide range of models. They produce such a high volume of vehicles because they have optimized their business to the bone. Like, they have wrung out every ounce of improvement because everyone in the company is part and parcel of what are called quality circles, where they meet on their own time, without being forced. They have proactive ownership. And as part of what they do, they think about how can we make the process much more efficient? How can we make it safer? How can it make it faster? How can we reduce errors? And that's what it takes to be on a winning team. So, what I want to do now is I'd like to stop talking and I want to give you a mini exercise. And I would love it if we could have one or two people chime in and, share their ideas. Can you think of a time when someone you worked with made things worse by waiting? And here's a question: what could they have done differently? Now, you don't have to turn on your mic. If you're not comfortable with that, that's perfectly fine. But please type into the chat, what could they have done differently? So if you could maybe just give a small intro about what it was that they did and what is it that they could have done differently. Just want to get your juices flowing and your thinking flowing. So think of a time when someone you worked with made things worse by waiting. What could they have done differently? So I'm just going to give you a minute or two to type into the chat and share your thoughts. Any contributions, any thoughts, any proactivity, anyone willing to lean in and share? Think of a time when someone you worked with made things worse by waiting. What could they have done differently? Hello? No one wants to chime in? Come on, guys and girls. What could they have done differently? You lost your zeal waiting to be allowed to officially launch a society. Yes, that's correct. So motivation can really die when things are left aside. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate that. Anyone else? What could they have done differently?
Hi, Paul.
Hey,
I think I'll contribute to this one just by basis of the issue, and this is my own personal experience, actually. I waited and things got worse.
yeah.
And it was a fear of it not being perfect. So
Uh-huh.
that then made me procrastinate on the task when I could have asked for more clarification on the task instead of sitting with it and sitting with, I didn't quite understand what the task requested of me. And then I
Yeah.
was overthinking and then procrastinated. So what
Yeah.
could have been done differently? Yes, is I could have just asked or said I wasn't sure about what was expected.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, and we'll see this in one of the behaviors, that I don't know if it is our culture, but I find that people don't like asking questions, even if they would benefit from asking questions. And one of the things one of my missions is I always ask questions because I know that people will benefit from asking questions. So even if I don't ask a question for myself, I ask a question because I know that people around me can benefit. And that's just part of sharing and part of being a good teammate, asking questions. And that really can make things really change. So thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next behavior, which you've probably seen. So the second behavior that I really want to highlight. Okay, thanks for sharing. Could have engaged juniors for input. They relied mostly on their experience. And that's a big weakness when it comes to working with teams, ignoring other people without realizing that everyone has something to contribute. So, behavior number two is professional presence. What do we mean by professional presence? And again, I'm going to start this off with a little quote. Imagine if this is what people say behind your back. They show up like they mean it. They show up like they mean it. What does that mean? That means that this person he's ready. She's available. She's primed. Just like imagine if you're going to punch a, like a, I don't know, or let's say throw a stone, and you want to be ready just at the moment when your name is called, that you throw it precisely at that point, or you throw the punch exactly at that point. That's what it means. You show up with professionally, you show up ready. People see that you're about to act, and that's exciting. Why does it matter? Well, here's a quote from a guy called Jim Rohn, and he said, "You don't get a second chance to make a first impression." First impressions can make a big, big difference in how you are treated going forward. So if you show up for an interview and you're late, unkempt, and you don't know anything about the company, there's very little chance that you're going to get the job. But even if only one of those things is a miss, you show up late, even if you're prepared and you know a lot about the company, that just takes away from your ability to shine. The tone of your voice, your body language, how you present yourself, these things matter. Why am I saying this? Because as students, we are used to operating at the same level. We are comfortable with one another. I remember when I was an undergraduate, I had classmates who'd come to class in slippers or flip-flops, and it was just normal for them, and it didn't bother them. And I thought, some of these things become habits. And it's become habits to the point that you even stop noticing. Like even your tone of voice, how you speak, being able to enunciate and speak clearly, like what I'm trying to do right now, that takes years of practice for it to become normal and natural and part of how you communicate. But that stands out. If you're sitting in an interview and you're speaking clearly, you're thinking before you answer, your body language shows that you are receptive and you're willing to engage, your presentation is clear, then people will be scratching their heads and wondering, why shouldn't we hire this person? You're going to give them a really hard time. And I'm going to say this. When I had the final interview for my first job, I'm going to tell you, I've never really said this to anyone, but I remember I was prepared for the interview, and I had gone to the company, and it was a board panel interview. So we had three very senior people. We had the head of HR, we had the chief technical officer, and we had one of the heads of engineering. And it was, as you can imagine, it was a very tense interview. I was very nervous, and I really dug in, like I really presented. And I finished the interview. I left and I said, I thanked them. I shook hands. I walked out. And as I was heading home, I literally As I was getting into the matatu, they called me and offered me the job. Like that for me was, it was for me a very strong sign that I had shown up in a professional way, and they were not going to wait and waste time about it, because they knew, like any recruiter knows, once we find a great person, hire them. Don't think about it. Don't wait about it. And that's happened actually to me several times in some of my jobs. So how you show up, and it really matters. It makes a big difference. So let's look at what it looks like. So, number one, being punctual and prepared. I read a great quote from a book about interviews that said, preparation prevents poor performance. And that really stuck with me because of its alliteration. Being ready, studying about the company. I remember doing an interview for KPMG, and I even took the time to understand, like, what does KPMG stand for? Of course, I've forgotten what it is, but that's what it means. You study, you write down notes, you have a more Kenya of everything about the company. And as you're heading through the interview, you're just revising and you're studying and you're sharpening your mind about what it what it means to work in this organization. So being punctual, being prepared. The second thing is you dress appropriately for the environment. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're going to a corporate environment, then you want to dress in a corporate way. And if you're attending an interview where it's a very different environment, maybe slightly casual, again, you'd rather be, err on the side of caution and dress up in a suit because they know that you'll want to present yourself well. But rather than assume that you can just show up without a tie, or you can just show up looking casual, wearing sneakers. So always dress appropriately for the environment, because that really helps you stand out. As I said, you only get one shot to make your first impression. The third thing is communicating clearly, concisely, and respectfully. Sometimes there is a temptation to say something funny, and you'll find that as you grow older, you'll begin to nurse a number of wounds from having done this in the wrong context. But it's important to be very clear in what you're communicating. Don't ramble and speak endlessly in circles. Be concise. And if that means pausing for a minute before you give your answer, then all the more for that. And of course, being respectful, because the people in the room are people who want to be respected. And respond to feedback without being defensive. Instead of, because defensiveness shows that you haven't learned your lesson. So these are the four things that I think exemplify that. Now, here's a little exercise, mini exercise. Imagine your boss sends you a message saying, "Can we talk later?" What's a professional versus an unprofessional way to react or respond? So your boss sends you a text saying, "Can we talk later?" Maybe you try to call him, or you messaged him and or her, and your boss says, "Oh, let's talk later. Can we talk later?" What would be a professional versus an unprofessional way to react? So again, if you can't do this in the chat, or if you want to open your mic and give a response, I'd really, really love to hear from you. So just for 1 minute, because we are running low on time, what would be a professional versus an unprofessional way to react or respond?
I'll try for the unprofessional.
Sure.
An unprofessional way to react will be like saying wazi.
Sorry?
Saying wazi ama noma.
Ah, okay. So using slang.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's absolutely correct. You never want to assume an informal relationship with your boss, because they always want to maintain professionalism in case they have to fire you. So always err on the side of caution. Unless, even if they become informal with you, always try and keep a formal and professional tone. Someone else? What would be a professional versus an unprofessional? So let's try for professional. Can someone give us an example of a professional way to respond? Well, you could say something like, "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to it." So as simple as that. Okay, recognizing the authority of your boss, your seniority, using referring to him or her as sir or madam, so that they know that you respect them. It's a really important thing, and it's easy again to take for granted some of these little exercises. Now, behavior number 3, and I'm going to rush through this, is learning agility. You really need to have this on your side. Like if you have this behavior, this will make a big difference to you. Again, this is what you want people to be saying behind your back. He doesn't know everything, but he gets better fast. He doesn't know, or she doesn't know everything, but she gets better fast. Why? Because she takes the time to learn, because she takes the time to find out what is missing from her skill set. And that is something that really, really stands out. Why does it matter? Well, because employers expect you to adapt, and they don't just expect you to adapt, they expect you to adapt fast. You need to be able to adapt as fast as possible. The workplace is a moving target. A lot of companies realize that they're in a marketplace where if they are incapable of adjusting to the changes in trends, they're gone. And so they want people who can grow, who can ask, who can reflect, who can iterate. Such people are invaluable. So let's look at some examples of what this looks like. One is asking smart questions early and then taking initiative. Now, you can ask, there are people who ask questions endlessly, but they don't do anything about it. And that actually ends up acting against you. What you really want to do is ask smart questions and take initiative. Show that asking the question was driven by an intention to drive your action. Another thing is seek feedback early, often, and apply it immediately. Don't let that idle. Seek feedback and apply it immediately. Because that's how you learn. You get corrected. You adjust your angle. Reflecting on mistakes, taking time to do things like journaling or blogging in a respectful way. You don't want to blog and badmouth your employer, but you reflect on mistakes instead of hiding them. Don't hide them. If you have a mentor, bring up your failings, your errors, or your successes and ask them to guide you. Because sometimes success makes us have a big head, and we go out into the market, into the work environment, and we begin to offend people because we think that our successes are giving us a chip on our shoulder. And then finally, pick up tools, systems, terminology quickly. If someone mentions something you've not heard before, write it down in your journal, write it down in your notebook. That means you have to have a notebook. You have to have somewhere where you record the things that you want to learn. And there is no end to learning. Like I've graduated more than 20 years ago from my undergraduate degree, but the number of things I have forced myself to learn, some of which have been instrumental in getting me another job. So I'm going to leave you with this mini exercise. We're not going to go through this. Write down a skill that you are bad at 6 months ago that you're now decent at. So, what helped you improve? This is a great way for you to reflect. What did I do that made a difference in developing this skill? So, I'm not going to pause for this and we're just going to move on. Here's a bonus one, and I know we've touched on it, but I really want to bring this up. Asking questions. I cannot emphasize enough the value of asking questions. We've touched on it in the learning agility. It's an essential part of you being able to learn. But I just want to isolate this skill, this behavior. Asking questions is what makes you stand out to people who are decision makers. Let that sink in. When you work in an environment where it is the norm for people not to ask questions, and you ask questions, then the senior people begin to notice you because they see that there's something that's on in your head. So asking questions is so important. And this is what people will say about you. You say, they don't pretend to know, they pursue clarity. They pursue understanding. Like they really want to grasp this. You want people to say this behind your back. Now, why does this matter? It's because generally we have a fear of asking questions. And it's fine to acknowledge that you have this fear, but you need to overcome this fear. It's an existential threat. If you don't ask questions, you don't learn. If you don't ask questions, then you don't grow. Asking questions is essential. So that's number one. You need to overcome that fear. Good questions signal engagement. They signal that you are participating, that you are online, that you have critical thinking skills, and that you want to hold people to account. And that's really important. It may be that we fear that asking questions is going to embarrass people. And no, and again, as I said, there are work environments where these behaviors are the norm. So if you're working in an environment where people look at you funnily because you're asking questions, then you're in the wrong environment. And I can assure you there is a work environment where people can spend a day just brainstorming and thinking because they want to explore all the angles of an idea. And silence hides confusion. It delays your learning, it keeps you back, and it allows you to continue avoidable mistakes, things that you could have just asked. You know, someone who is responsible for you, who is managing you, will be shocked. They'll ask, why didn't you ask? Why did you spend the whole of last week working on this, working so hard, and without a clear understanding? Why didn't you just ask? So asking questions is so important. So let's see what this looks like. And there are four ways that we can ask questions. Number one is we ask what are called clarifying questions. These are questions in which you reveal your understanding and you ask, is my understanding correct? Is this what I hear you saying? The next kind of questions are what are called contextual questions. And contextual questions are questions that reveal that maybe what you're hearing or what you're responding to may be coming from a context very different from yourself. So you're trying to get the right context. So you'd ask something like, it seems to me that you're referring to this as if it is upside down. Is that what you mean? And that, again, is very, very helpful. Ask follow-up questions after you receive feedback. If someone says, it seems to me like you are struggling with this, and this is something that you develop, and then you could ask questions. What part of that am I struggling with? What part does it appear like? What do you think I can do? All those questions will really, really accelerate you. And finally, ask reflective questions like, what could I do better next time? And in fact, it's even better if these questions come about on your own. Like nobody forces you to try and ask these questions, but you're always asking, what could I do better? What could I do to improve? What can I do next time that will make me faster? And people will begin to notice and they start saying, well, he doesn't pretend that he knows, or she doesn't pretend that she knows, but she pursues clarity. So here's a mini exercise. And again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to put this here and I'm going to let you mull over this. Think of a time you stayed silent, even though you didn't understand something. What happened next? And how could a question have helped? And this is such a powerful question because it shows you that there are consequences of not asking questions. And now that we've reached that point, this is your opportunity to ask questions. And I'd love it if you had as many questions as possible. And because to me, it would signify that that last point has sunk in. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I actually have one.
Yes, Samuel.
At the beginning, you did mention that generally in Kenya, we don't have that culture, or rather, we have that fear of asking questions.
Yes.
Where do you think it comes from? I generally have a theory that it comes from maybe our primary schools, because I remember sometimes in my primary school, if someone was deemed to be asking a silly question, he will be caned. So do you think that issue has stemmed somewhere from our education?
Yes. That's a great question and a great theory. I agree with what you're saying. I think that's one part of it. But again, I don't want us to use that as an excuse. I'm not saying that you're using it as an excuse, but just because it has been normalized doesn't mean we shouldn't break the mold. Like, and this is the reason why I kept saying, giving this example, that there are work environments where this is normal. There are certain cultures where if you don't ask questions, people will actually think you're retarded, you're slow, and then you'll be passed up for promotion. And those are the kind of jobs that you really want to aspire for. You want to aspire to work in environments where it is normal to ask questions. And therefore, we should be uncomfortable. And my hope is that this is still very early on in your career. Um, but you're right. To a large extent, as a culture, we don't pride ourselves in asking questions. We think that that's the job of journalists, and we will listen to the answers that to the questions that journalists have asked. But we need to be very uncomfortable. If you feel in yourself like you don't understand something, you should always ask. If you don't, but fortunately, we now live in a day and age where we have ChatGPT. But you know what? My suspicion is that lack of asking questions even translates into how we interact with tools like ChatGPT. Because if we have not trained ourselves to ask questions, the quality of our questions will be very poor. So I'd encourage you, ask questions, make it a habit. Be uncomfortable if nobody gives you a chance to ask questions. Thanks, Samuel. Next question. Okay, so if you don't have any,
Excuse me.
yes, go on,
Hi.
Carla. Thank you for, go ahead.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm Caroline, and I have this question of timelines. As a Gen Z, my thought is if you say my contract is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I do not expect to be contacted at 5:01 p.m. Is it valid? And how do I communicate that to my seniors in a respectful way so that they're able to know that I want some distinction between my work hours and my personal time? You've had that
That's
thing of when it's 4:59, Gen Zs just close their laptops. I think we're in the generation where we care so much about our personal time, but then that creates a lot of conflict. What do you have to say about it?
That's a great question, and thank you for bringing that up, Caroline. So you know what? You are right to defend your time. I'm not going to argue against that. But I'll also invite you to think about the following: that for every 97 people who will shut their laptop on time, 3 will stay on. And those 3 who stay on, I want you to look at where their careers will be in 5, 10, 15 years. So, yes, you're right. It is your right. Your contract says it's 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever. That's what it says. But here's the thing. Does it mean also that you're not going to continue to think about some of your work problems at home? Does it mean that you completely cut off? And if it does, then it means those 3 people who continue to do that, they stand out head and shoulders above everyone else. And I don't know what that means to you, because in the long run, like for a lot of managerial jobs and director level and chief level and um, people who run companies, they never shut down. They don't shut down. They don't have boundaries on their time. Their life is just a continual stream of work. And of course, they know how to then have holidays. They set aside time where they say, okay, I know I'm going to go on holiday for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but at that point, I will completely shut off. But now I'm going to be available. So it's a choice. There's a fork in the road. You have an option. Will I decide that I'm going to be very strict and dogmatic about my work time? And you know what? Nobody will fault you for that. But remember, for every 97 who are going to do that, there are going to be 3 people who will say, I'm going to wake up early and I'm going to read about this topic because I think it's going to help me in my job. Or I'm going to stay on for an extra 5 minutes with my boss because I'm going to help him just solve this problem because this is critical to our company. Or I'm going to wake up at midnight to fix that bug. And I'm going to allow myself, while I'm young and I don't have all the commitments of family, I'm going to allow myself to give and to learn and to stretch, because that's what the job market requires. At least that's what it rewards. So it's a choice, Caroline. It's a great question. It's a choice, but there are consequences either way. I'd like to hear
If
you
you allow
respond.
me, I have a
Yes, I'd
follow-up on the
love to. I'd
same.
love you to hear you.
Okay, so here's my thought process. I don't mind putting in the extra hours. You tell me we do 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., fine. But those extra hours, I need them in my leave days. Yeah. Because I've seen situations where people extend their work hours, but their salaries do not increase. They do not get time to rest. Well, is it something that is feasible in the job market now that you've been there for a long time? Or should I tone down and rethink my choices?
Again, thank you for that. You're right. I think the reality is, even when you say that you're available from 8 to 5, we know that there are going to be lulls in that 8 to 5. And the truth of the matter, let's just be honest about this. In that 8 to 5, are you 100% available to your employer? Will you make personal calls? Will you do personal errands? And it's not a question of trying to victimize or to accuse. It's just the nature of life. Like, once you're in the stage where you have children, you will have to stop if your child is unwell. You'll have to stop if you're called by the school and they tell you, oh, your child has had an accident or your child is not feeling well. So the reality is it's not that strict. And employers understand that you may need to take time off here. And they sometimes they do it for free. Like they don't say you have to put it on your leave calendar or anything like that. So I guess it's a if you're in a job environment where you are like a machine, where from the moment you get in till the moment you get out, it is back to back to back to back, then that's not a job that you can sustain, because in the long run you're going to be burnt out. So maybe in such a situation, I would say look for another job. But the majority of good employers have flexibility. You'll go for lunch and you'll go for an extended lunch break. Are you going to give them back those hours? So it becomes very complicated, and it's much better to think about it, especially if you're in a healthy work environment, as a dance. So where sometimes your employer gives you and sometimes you have to give your employer, and you're in a relationship. It's a hopefully a long-term relationship where both of you are benefiting. So I'd ask you to look at it from the bigger perspective and not just from the clock perspective. Because in reality, even we as employees, we benefit from taking a few hours here and there to do some personal things, which in life, these are necessary. I'd love to hear you come back on that.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. And I think that now makes a lot of sense. If I think it's like a two-way thing. If your employer is kind of lenient, you shall be lenient as well. If
Yeah.
your employer is strict, I may have no choice,
Yeah.
because I've seen employers who are like, someone takes a sick leave, but you go to their house to confirm they're actually sick. Wait, I could be mentally not okay, and
Yeah.
that's justified as sick, from a Gen Z. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate your insights. And thank you for sparing your time to give us insights of how to get into the job market.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing before we go. On the 11th of July, we're going to have now a second one if you're interested. And this is going to be now the opposite. So we've talked about the positive behaviors. What I want to now talk about in this is the 5 things you should never do in your new job. Some of them are funny, some of them are actually true stories without revealing any details about anyone. So you can scan the QR code and I can put the link if you want to sign up for that event. From campus to career, 5 things you should never do in your new job.